It started with a sound, soft, strange, and almost lost in the noise of the stars. No one on Earth noticed it at first. Space is full of signals, old satellites, radio echoes, bits of noise that mean nothing. But one night, deep in the silence of a desert observatory, a signal arrived that didn't fade away. It repeated itself, once, twice again. The scientists listening to the universe paused. They ran checks, compared data, and argued quietly. Some said it was just background interference. Others swore they heard patterns, numbers, pauses, a rhythm too deliberate to be natural. It didn't take long before the world's observatories tuned in, curious and cautious. The signal came again, stronger this time. It wasn't just sound anymore. Hidden inside the repeating tones were symbols, spirals, waves, shapes that formed a language. The discovery spread like wildfire. News channels reported alien signal detected. Some people celebrated, others panicked, and a few thought it was a prank. But soon it became clear. This wasn't human. The message, once decoded, was heartbreakingly simple. It said, "We need life. We need help." No one knew where it came from at first. The coordinates pointed toward a quiet corner of the galaxy, far beyond any human probe. There were no nearby stars known to have life. Whoever sent the message must have been desperate to send it so far, across so much emptiness. The world's leaders gathered. Meetings were held in secret rooms. Broadcast signals studied by experts and moral debates filled every corner of the internet. Should humanity answer? What if it was a trap? What if it wasn't? Months passed. Scientists tested and rechecked everything. They discovered the message was at least 800 years old. Whoever sent it might already be gone. Still, the idea that someone somewhere had reached out for help. It didn't let the human heart rest easy. So Earth decided to answer. But the answer didn't come from armies or politicians. It came from people who believed in life. Biologists, engineers, farmers, animal behaviorists, and dreamers. They formed a single project called the Ark. The goal wasn't to conquer or claim. It was simple, to bring life where there was none. For 2 years, the Ark was built in orbit. Not just one ship, but a fleet, a moving ecosystem. They carried seeds, microbes, bees, and even small animals capable of surviving new environments. Every species on board had a purpose. Some were for food chains, some for atmosphere repair, others for companionship and learning. Humans led the mission, but they weren't alone. Dogs walked the corridors beside them. Birds nested in artificial trees, and small tanks held coral fragments and ocean microbes. It was a piece of Earth, floating through the stars. When launch day came, the world watched together. For once, there were no wars, no borders, just a single hope. The ships rose through the clouds, bright as suns, carrying humanity's answer to a cry across time and distance. Months turned into years. The crew lived between sleep cycles, passing through the endless dark. The stars looked the same every day. Some began to wonder if the call had truly come from anyone at all. But then the sensors picked up a planet ahead, faint, weak, barely alive. It was the world that had called them. The planet hung in the blackness like a dying ember. Its surface was brown and cracked, oceans thin and still, the atmosphere choking in slow collapse. There were signs of cities, but silent, ruins half buried under dust and time. The people who had sent the message, the Tyrell, were not extinct, but they were fading. When the Terran fleet entered orbit, the aliens looked up. Their world had grown quiet for so long that even hope had fallen asleep. But when they saw light streaking across the sky, ships breaking through the clouds, they gathered in trembling awe. The humans landed carefully, wearing suits that shimmered under the alien sun. The Tyrell watched from a distance. They expected majestic beings, creatures of light or pure energy. Instead, they saw people, ordinary, tired, and breathing hard after a long journey. At first, both sides stood silent. The air was heavy with fear and wonder. Then one of the humans stepped forward, opened a small container, and poured something onto the ground, soil. Dark, rich, and alive. Then came seeds. The Tyrell didn't understand, but they watched as the humans placed small metal towers in the soil, setting up machines that pumped air, sprayed mist, and adjusted sunlight. Drones flew overhead, carrying green pods that burst open like fireworks, spreading spores and engineered bacteria into the wind. Within hours, the first signs of change appeared. The dusty air began to shift. The wind carried faint scents, damp, earthy, strange. The humans released insects, tiny glowing creatures built to survive harsh atmospheres. The Tyrell watched them spread across the wasteland, landing on dry leaves that hadn't moved in generations. When night fell, the aliens saw something they had never seen before: stars above, and small fires of life below. The Tyrell approached cautiously, their bodies thin and pale from centuries of hunger. One of them pointed at the strange creatures walking beside the humans, a dog, tail wagging, sniffing the alien air. Behind it, another human carried a cage of birds that chirped quietly. The Tyrell could not understand why humans brought animals, but soon they saw. The dog barked, the birds flew in circles, and for the first time in centuries, sound filled the air again. Life had returned, not perfect, not gentle, but alive. The aliens tried to communicate. Their voices were soft and slow, like wind through metal. The human translators did their best, showing symbols, gestures, and emotions. It wasn't easy, but both sides wanted to understand. Finally, a message came through. "You answered." The humans smiled. One of them looked up at the fading sun and said simply, "Yes, you called for life." Days turned into weeks. The humans worked tirelessly. They built domes filled with growing plants, filtered the poisonous air, and introduced microbes into the soil that began breaking down the toxins. The Tyrell watched everything. They had once been a great race, but now they realized how much they had forgotten about the simple miracle of growth. One evening, as the sky turned purple, the humans gathered near the landing site. They watched the first patch of green rise from the ground, small blades of grass swaying in the wind. Some of them cried quietly. Even the Tyrell, who had long forgotten tears, felt their eyes sting. It wasn't just science, it was emotion. For years, their people had believed they were alone. They had thought the universe had turned its back on them. But here, standing in the dirt, were beings from another world. Creatures who had come not for conquest, not for wealth, but to give life. That night, the Tyrell city lit up for the first time in generations. The humans stayed awake, staring at the sky, thinking about home, the blue oceans, the green forests, and the millions of lives still breathing on Earth. They didn't know if they'd ever return, but it didn't matter. Somewhere out there, they had given a dying planet another chance. And deep within the alien soil, under layers of ash and dust, something stirred. Tiny roots began to push through. Small insects crawled over them. The ground that had been silent for centuries began to hum softly with the sound of life returning. The message that had traveled across galaxies had finally been answered, not with weapons or machines, but with compassion and courage. And though the humans didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning. The Tyrell would soon learn that Earth's answer wasn't just human. The creatures of Earth, the loyal, the wild, the small, and the strange, had come too. And in the end, it would be them who changed the galaxy forever. As dawn broke over the planet, the humans stood beside their animals and watched the sun rise on a world that wasn't their own, but now, somehow felt like home. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Tyrell sky was no longer gray. It was alive, with color, with sound, and with hope. The call had been heard, and Earth had answered. When the first human ships landed on the Tyrell world, no one could have imagined what would come next. The planet was still fragile, its skies heavy with dust, its ground brittle like old bone. Yet life had begun to take hold again. Tiny green shoots, faint clouds forming where there had been only dryness and silence before. The humans had brought change, but they had also brought something else: companions. The Tyrell people didn't understand it at first. They thought the humans had come with advanced weapons or machines to rebuild cities. Instead, they came with animals, plants, and microorganisms, creatures of all kinds. When the Tyrell scientists saw small boxes filled with buzzing insects or tanks carrying fish and corals, they were confused. Why would any species travel across light years carrying such fragile things? The humans simply said, "Because life never travels alone." It became clear that Earth's response to the call wasn't just human, it was every living thing that had learned how to adapt and survive. The Ark fleet wasn't a group of soldiers or explorers. It was an entire network of ecosystems carefully chosen to bring a dead planet back to life. The Tyrell found it strange. Their own civilization had once valued perfection, machines over animals, efficiency over emotion. When their planet began to die, They had tried to control every drop of air and water, but they forgot how to live with nature. Now they watched as humans released bees into the air, planted forests, and allowed creatures to roam free. On the second month after landing, a group of Tyrell scientists visited one of the growing green zones. The humans called it Habitat 1. It wasn't large, maybe a few hundred meters wide, but it was alive. In the center grew tall trees that reached toward the sky. Around them, patches of grass danced in the wind. Birds sang softly in the branches. And beside the trees, small animals, rabbits, lizards, and creatures from Earth, moved about without fear. The Tyrell leader stood silently, taking it all in. The air smelled different now. It was lighter, warmer. The wind carried the scent of soil and growth, something their world hadn't felt for centuries. He turned to the humans and asked, "Why did you bring these creatures? Why not just machines?" The human scientist smiled. "Because machines can build structures," he said, "but only life can build a world." The Tyrell didn't answer. They just watched as a small dog ran across the field, chasing a flying ball thrown by a young human technician. The sight was strange yet beautiful. For the first time, the Tyrell began to understand. The animals played, but they also worked in their own ways. The bees pollinated flowers that had been grown from Earth's seeds. The worms loosened the soil. The birds spread seeds across the air, carrying life further than the humans could reach. The humans had brought an entire balance, something that didn't come from control but from trust between species. Days turned into weeks, and the Tyrell grew curious about every creature. They studied how a crow learned to use small stones to open fruit. They watched how dogs sensed changes in air pressure before storms formed. They marveled when a patch of algae began cleaning the planet's shallow water pools. It was as if Earth had sent not just helpers but teachers, each life form showing the Tyrell how to live again. But not everything was easy. The planet was still harsh. The sun burned too hot in the afternoons, and the soil was full of hidden poisons from old factories. Some of the creatures struggled to survive. A few plants withered and many insects couldn't adapt to the air. When that happened, the humans didn't give up. They worked together, testing new combinations of species, adjusting air filters, creating shaded domes where fragile life could grow safely. Every failure was met with patience, not anger. The Tyrell were shocked to see how humans treated life, with care, with emotion, as if every small being mattered. One Tyrell scientist asked, "You act as if these creatures are your equals." A human replied quietly, "They are. We just speak different languages." The Tyrell had never thought this way before. Their world had always been divided, intelligent beings on one side and all other life seen as tools or decoration. But watching the humans live beside their creatures, eating with them, talking to them, protecting them, planted a new idea in their minds. Maybe life wasn't a hierarchy. Maybe it was a circle. By the fourth month, the transformation was visible even from orbit. Parts of the planet that were once gray began to turn green. Rivers started flowing again. The air shimmered with humidity. The Tyrell cities, long silent, began to echo with new sounds. Children laughing, birds singing, animals calling to each other. It was as if the planet itself had woken from a long sleep. The Tyrell began to help more actively. They learned from the humans how to plant, how to care for soil, how to let nature do its work instead of controlling it. The humans taught them how to feel the rhythm of the world instead of trying to dictate it. Together, they created a balance that neither could have achieved alone. One day, a storm hit the southern plain. It was the strongest in years, tearing through the half-grown forests and shaking the domes. The Tyrell panicked, afraid they would lose everything again. But the humans stood firm. They gathered the animals, secured the domes, and waited. When the storm finally passed, the Tyrell expected to see destruction. Instead, they saw something else. The ground was covered in broken branches and fallen leaves, but underneath them, new green shoots had already started to grow. The human leader turned to the Tyrell and said, "See? This is how life fights back. It bends, but it doesn't break." That night, as the Tyrell walked among the ruins of old buildings now covered in vines, they began to understand something deeper. Earth's creatures were not just survivors. They were masters of adaptation. They didn't wait for perfect conditions. They made things better simply by existing, by trying, by refusing to give up. The humans told them stories of their own world, how forests had once burned, how oceans had risen, how people and animals had struggled but always found a way to recover. The Tyrell listened in silence, realizing that these humans and their companions had come from a world that knew pain and chaos, but had never surrendered to it. As weeks passed, the Tyrell began adopting Earth's ways. They started planting their own gardens, keeping small animals, and rebuilding homes near the new green zones. They even began speaking to the creatures, copying the sounds humans used. A few brave Tyrell children learned how to care for birds, feeding them gently from their hands. The bond between the two worlds deepened, but there was one moment that changed everything. A Tyrell elder, one of the oldest survivors of their civilization, stood before a group of humans and asked, "When our message left this planet, we never imagined anyone would hear it. Why did you come so far for us? You didn't know us. You could have ignored it." The human answered softly, "Because once, long ago, we needed help too, and no one answered. We promised ourselves that if we ever heard another voice asking for life, we would not stay silent." The Tyrell bowed their heads. They realized that humanity's greatest strength wasn't technology, it was empathy, the ability to care for something beyond themselves. By the end of the 6th month, the planet's surface had changed completely. What was once a dying world had become a living mosaic. Earth plants growing beside alien vines, human-built lakes filled with adapted fish, Tyrell homes surrounded by gardens of color. The animals had found balance in this new land, just as the two species had found balance in each other. The message that had once cried out into the void, "We need life. We need help," had been answered in the most unexpected way. The Tyrell had called for saviors and the universe had sent life itself. Now, every time the Tyrell looked at the sky and saw the bright blue hue of their recovering atmosphere, they remembered the day the humans arrived. They remembered the small dog running through the grass, the sound of birds returning to the wind, and the laughter of people who had crossed the stars just to remind them what it meant to live. The Tyrell began sending their own message back into the universe, one filled not with desperation, but with gratitude. It said, "We called for help. Life answered." And somewhere out there among the countless stars, that message kept traveling, carrying the story of two worlds that met, not in war but in hope. The humans didn't know how long they would stay, maybe a few more years, maybe longer, but they knew one thing for sure: this planet would live, and its people would never forget the creatures of Earth who came when the galaxy cried out for life. Under a sky that was once gray but now painted in soft blue and gold, humans, animals, and Tyrell stood together, watching the wind move gently through the grass. The world was alive again, and this time it wasn't alone. When the humans and their companions stepped fully onto the surface of the Tyrell world, everything changed. For the Tyrell, it was the first real contact with another intelligent species. They had imagined what aliens might look like, perhaps tall beings made of light or creatures that floated gracefully without weight. What they saw instead were humans covered in dust and sweat, carrying boxes and tools, walking beside animals that barked, chirped, or buzzed. The Tyrell were silent, watching from a distance. Their large eyes blinked slowly, trying to understand what they were seeing. To them, humans seemed strange, so full of movement, so noisy, so emotional. They laughed loudly, argued, comforted each other, and touched the ground as if greeting an old friend. The Tyrell didn't know what to make of it. When the first human approached them holding a translator device, the Tyrell flinched. The device hummed softly, repeating simple words. "We come in peace. We heard your call." The Tyrell leader, thin and pale from years of famine, spoke through their own machine. The voice that came out was calm but trembling. "You are from the blue world?" The human nodded. "Yes, from Earth." The Tyrell repeated the word slowly, tasting its sound. Earth. It felt heavy, real, alive. The meeting didn't start with grand speeches or promises. It started with quiet gestures, humans offering food, water, and small gifts. A handful of soil, a small plant, a piece of metal engraved with a simple circle representing unity. The Tyrell accepted, unsure how to respond, but something inside them began to stir. A feeling they hadn't known in generations: hope. The next few days were filled with cautious curiosity. The humans worked around the landing site, setting up habitats, growing stations, and laboratories. They brought out their animals to help with work. Dogs sniffing out safe areas, birds spreading small seeds, and drones releasing mist that carried life-building microbes. The Tyrell watched everything, amazed at how smoothly life from Earth began to adapt. The first shock came when the Tyrell saw how humans interacted with their animals. A worker knelt down to pet a tired dog, speaking softly to it. Another smiled as a bird landed on her arm. A group of humans sat near a fire at night, sharing food with their animal companions. The Tyrell had never seen such behavior. On their world, animals were gone long ago, hunted, controlled, or replaced by machines. They had forgotten what it meant to share a world with other creatures. One young Tyrell scientist whispered, "They speak to their beasts as if they understand." Another replied quietly, "Maybe they do." The humans didn't just bring tools and knowledge, they brought warmth. They brought laughter and music. The Tyrell gathered near their camps to listen to strange instruments, simple rhythms that seemed to echo through the barren valleys. The sound of music had been absent from their world for centuries. Some Tyrell cried softly, though they didn't know why. As time passed, the Tyrell began to approach the humans more often. They asked questions, pointed at plants and animals, and tried to understand how everything worked together. The humans explained in simple terms how the soil needed the worms, how bees helped flowers grow, how trees cleaned the air. The Tyrell found it hard to believe. "You let creatures decide the fate of your world?" one of them asked. The humans smiled gently. "We don't let them. We trust them. Life knows what to do. We just help." That sentence stayed in the Tyrell's minds for days. They began to realize that humanity's strength wasn't in control. It was in cooperation. Humans didn't rule their planet. They lived with it. But the shock wasn't just emotional, it was physical too. The Tyrell's atmosphere was still weak. Their bodies couldn't handle sudden changes, and sometimes the new air made them dizzy. Humans noticed quickly and adjusted everything: oxygen levels, temperature, food nutrition. They even created small safe zones where Tyrell and Earth species could meet gradually, without harm. The Tyrell watched how humans cared not only for their own, but also for the weakest of creatures. Once, a human spent an entire day helping a small bird whose wing was injured. The Tyrell couldn't understand why so much time was spent on something so small. When they asked, the human said, "Because every life matters. If this world is to live again, everything must live together." That night, several Tyrell elders gathered in silence. They spoke of their past, how their ancestors once valued machines more than nature, how they had turned their oceans into factories, and how they had slowly destroyed the balance that once sustained them. Looking at the humans, they saw what they had lost, a connection to life itself. As the days grew longer, the Tyrell began to change. They started helping the humans plant crops and build shelters. Their thin hands, unused to soil, slowly became steady and strong again. The humans taught them how to use simple tools and let them name the new growing plants in their own language. Some Tyrell even adopted small animals as companions. It was awkward at first, but soon they began to smile, a rare thing among them. Still, there were moments of tension. Not everyone on Tyrell trusted these visitors. Some feared that the humans would take control as past invaders once did. A few whispered that the humans were changing their world too fast, that this rebirth would come with a price. But as the months passed and life spread further, those doubts began to fade. The evidence was everywhere: rivers flowing again, plants covering the dust, and skies turning from gray to blue. One evening, a storm approached. The wind howled across the plains, dark clouds twisting like angry ghosts. The Tyrell panicked. Storms here used to destroy everything. But the humans remained calm. They guided everyone into shelters, securing the animals and protecting the new plants. When lightning flashed and thunder rolled across the sky, the humans stayed close, sharing warmth and food. The storm lasted all night. But when dawn came, the Tyrell stepped outside and saw something they never expected. The plants had survived. The rain had made them stronger. The humans laughed, letting the water wash the dust from their faces. "This," one said, "is how life works. It doesn't run from the storm, it grows through it." The Tyrell began to understand. In the following weeks, the humans shared more of their history. They spoke of Earth's past, how their world too had suffered wars, pollution, and near extinction. They told of forests lost and oceans rising, and how people had finally learned, after great struggle, that no species could live alone. The Tyrell listened closely. For the first time, they didn't see the humans as saviors or strangers. They saw them as reflections, another world that had fallen but learned to rise again. As the bond between the two grew stronger, the Tyrell made a discovery. The microorganisms humans had brought were slowly changing the soil, making it fertile again. The air became richer, the temperature softer. Life was taking root faster than anyone expected. What had taken humans centuries to heal on Earth was happening here in months. It felt like a miracle, but it was simply nature doing what it always did when given a chance. The humans and Tyrell began celebrating small victories together. When the first tree reached full height, they stood around it in silence, each understanding what it meant. When the first wild creature born on Tyrell opened its eyes, laughter filled the air. For the first time in living memory, the Tyrell were not just surviving. They were living. Every day, the aliens learned something new from Earth's creatures. They learned patience from the bees, teamwork from the ants, and resilience from the plants that grew through cracks in broken stone. And from the humans, they learned heart, the strength to keep going even when everything seems lost. The Tyrell's children grew up seeing humans as family, their animals as playmates, and green as the color of hope. The once silent cities now echoed with sounds of life again. Birds nested on old buildings. Dogs chased through the streets. Rivers carried the reflection of twin suns and new beginnings. One evening, as the two suns set, a Tyrell elder looked up at the glowing sky and whispered, "We thought we called for help. But what we truly called for was life, and life answered." The humans didn't reply. They simply smiled, knowing that the words were true. The Tyrell had once been a dying civilization, but now they were learning the oldest truth in the universe, that survival isn't about power or perfection. It's about connection. And so on that small world far from Earth, two species shared something more powerful than technology or science. They shared understanding. The Tyrell had expected gods to come from the sky. Instead, Earth sent people who carried hope, kindness, and the wild heart of their world, and that was enough to change the fate of an entire planet. The Tyrell world was changing faster than anyone thought possible. What had once been a silent, broken land was now filled with movement and sound. The air was no longer thick with dust. It carried the smell of rain, grass, and growing life. Every morning, the sound of birds filled the sky. The humans watched with quiet pride as Earth's creatures settled into their new home. The Tyrell couldn't stop watching them. Every creature seemed to have a purpose. The bees worked endlessly, moving from flower to flower, building small hives along the edges of alien rocks. The crows had learned how to open the shells of Tyrell fruits, dropping them from the sky and feeding not just themselves but smaller creatures below. Even the worms that humans had brought were doing their part, breaking down the dry soil and helping plants grow. The humans called it balance. The Tyrell called it miracle. Everywhere life touched, something changed. The gray stones started turning green. Water began to flow again in dry riverbeds. The once silent forests began to hum softly at night. The Tyrell would gather in small groups just to watch the animals go about their day. To them, it was more beautiful than any technology they had ever created. But what amazed them most wasn't the science. It was the connection. The humans didn't treat these creatures as tools or experiments. They treated them like friends, sometimes even like family. A dog running beside its human, a bird perching on a shoulder, or a cat curling up in someone's lap. All of it was new and confusing for the Tyrell. Their kind had forgotten what companionship between species looked like. One Tyrell elder asked a human, "Why do you care so much for these creatures?" "They are not your kind." The human smiled gently and replied, "Because they make us who we are. Without them, we're incomplete." That answer stayed with the Tyrell for days. They began to understand that the human strength didn't just come from intelligence, it came from connection. Humanity had learned how to live with the wild, not above it. And that connection was something the Tyrell had lost long ago. Soon, the Tyrell began joining in the work. They learned how to plant seeds, how to take care of the soil, and even how to protect the animals from storms. They worked side by side with humans, sweating under the strange suns, laughing when plants grew faster than expected, and crying when some failed. Slowly, they stopped seeing Earth's creatures as outsiders. They began calling them the breath of the planet. One day, while exploring a newly grown forest, a group of Tyrell scientists discovered something extraordinary. The soil under the trees was producing a faint golden glow at night. When examined closely, they realized it was a new type of fungus, something that had never existed before. It was a natural combination of Earth's microbes and Tyrell minerals working together. It wasn't from Earth and it wasn't from Tyrell. It was something new. The humans smiled when they saw it. "That's how life works," one said. "When two worlds meet, they create something neither could alone." The Tyrell nodded, their eyes reflecting the soft light of the glowing soil. It was more than beauty. It was proof that life didn't need permission to begin again. Months passed and the changes became impossible to ignore. Tyrell's atmosphere grew thicker. The temperature balanced itself. The air began to shimmer with warmth. The plants now spread across entire valleys and strange new species of insects began to appear. Half Earth, half Tyrell. The scientists recorded everything, amazed at how quickly their world was healing. But even with all this progress, the humans stayed humble. They never claimed the planet or demanded praise. They didn't act like saviors, they acted like gardeners. They worked quietly, smiling when the Tyrell thanked them, but always reminding them that it was their own world doing the real work. The Tyrell started to admire humans in a new way. They saw how they lived together, not through orders but through understanding. Humans trusted their instincts, worked as teams, and respected even the smallest life. It was something the Tyrell began to imitate. They started forming small communities again, not around machines, but around gardens. Everywhere you went on Tyrell, you could see new life. Birds nesting on rooftops, streams filled with small glowing fish, children playing with dogs and strange furry creatures that had adapted to the alien world. The cities no longer felt like tombs, they felt alive again. And then came the most powerful moment of all. A new generation of Tyrell children was born after the humans arrived. These children grew up surrounded by life. They learned the sounds of birds before they learned the sound of machines. They chased dogs through meadows and fed fruits to alien insects. To them, this was normal, the idea that life was shared, not owned. One evening, as the two suns began to set, a young Tyrell child brought a small flower to a human worker. The flower was blue, glowing softly in the dark. "This one grew by itself," the child said proudly. The human looked at it and felt tears rise. That simple flower meant the world had finally learned to grow again, without help, without control. But life was never simple. With new growth came new challenges. Some of the creatures brought from Earth began changing faster than expected. Certain insects adapted to Tyrell's minerals and started producing thick webs that covered trees. Some plants grew too quickly, blocking light from others. The Tyrell became worried that they might lose balance again. The humans didn't panic. They gathered everyone and explained what they called the cycle of life. "Every world learns through mistakes," they said. "We can't stop nature from changing, but we can guide it." Together they studied the new changes, learned from them, and made adjustments. They didn't destroy what went wrong. They adapted just as life always does. Slowly everything settled into a new kind of harmony. Different, but stable. The Tyrell began to realize that Earth's creatures had done something no machine ever could. They had taught an entire species how to live again. One afternoon, a group of humans stood near a massive field of green stretching beyond the horizon. The Tyrell leader joined them and asked softly, "How did you know this would work?" The human looked toward the distant mountains and said, "We didn't know. We just believed in life. It always finds a way." Those words became a symbol on Tyrell, a reminder of the faith that had brought them back from the edge. The Tyrell scientists began recording the history of the recovery. They wrote about how humans had come not as conquerors but as friends. They described the creatures of Earth, the bees, the dogs, the crows, and the unseen microbes as heroes of a quiet revolution. The story spread across their rebuilt cities. Murals were painted showing humans planting trees and Tyrell children holding glowing flowers. The art wasn't just decoration. It was memory carved into the heart of a reborn world. One night, under a sky full of stars, the humans and Tyrell gathered around a fire. The air was calm and warm, and small glowing insects danced in the light. A Tyrell elder stood up and said, "We once thought intelligence was measured by how much we could build. Now we see it's measured by how much we can give back." No one spoke for a long time after that. The humans looked up at the stars, thinking about their own home, Earth, and how far they had come. Maybe this was humanity's real purpose, they thought. Not to conquer worlds, but to heal them as the night grew quiet. The sounds of the forest surrounded them, the rustle of leaves, the gentle hum of insects, and the distant call of strange creatures that now called Tyrell home. It was the sound of balance, the sound of a planet learning to breathe again. The Tyrell had called across the galaxy for help. They had expected machines or gods or warriors. Instead, Earth sent them something far more powerful: life. And that life, in all its wild and beautiful forms, had changed everything. By the time the humans and their creatures had fully settled on the Tyrell world, the planet was no longer merely surviving. It was learning. Every corner of the land bore signs of recovery. Green forests stretched across old gray plains, rivers sparkled where they had once been dry, and the air was thick with life again. But it wasn't just the planet that was changing. The Tyrell themselves were being transformed in ways they had never expected. For centuries, the Tyrell had relied on machines and strict control to keep their society alive. They believed that only through rules and technology could life continue. But now, watching the humans and their creatures, the Tyrell discovered a truth they had long forgotten. Survival is not about controlling everything. It is about adaptation, patience, and cooperation. The humans had not just restored the planet. They had taught it to heal naturally. Bees moved from flower to flower, pollinating new plants. Dogs helped humans guard delicate areas and alerted them to changes in the environment. Crows adapted to the alien fruits, helping spread seeds across valleys. Even the tiniest bacteria the humans brought were quietly transforming the soil, making it richer, stronger, and more alive. The Tyrell began to notice that every living thing had a purpose, even when it seemed small or insignificant. One morning, a group of Tyrell scientists gathered with the humans near a newly planted forest. The ground was soft with damp soil. Small insects crawled between the roots, and birds circled overhead singing their complex songs. The Tyrell had observed nature before, but never like this. Everything was connected. Every creature, every plant, every movement mattered. "Life is teaching us again," said one Tyrell softly. "We thought we knew what it meant to live, but we were wrong." A human nodded. "Life doesn't always need rules. Sometimes it just needs respect. Let it work, let it breathe, and it will show you the way." That afternoon, they walked together through the forest. A young Tyrell child ran ahead, laughing as a small dog chased after her. A bird perched on her shoulder, gently nibbling at her hair. The humans watched and smiled. They had brought this world back to life, but they also allowed the Tyrell to experience it for themselves. In the weeks that followed, the Tyrell began experimenting. They planted small gardens, built homes near rivers, and even began raising earth animals of their own. They discovered that animals could teach patience, how to wait, observe, and respond rather than rush. Dogs and cats became companions, guiding their owners and teaching them loyalty and care. Bees and birds showed how teamwork could solve problems naturally. The Tyrell also learned from failure. Sometimes the introduced creatures struggled. Some plants died from the alien soil. Some insects failed to adapt. But instead of despair, the humans taught them resilience. "Mistakes are part of life," one human explained. "The world will not stop because something fails. It will adapt, and so will we." Slowly, the Tyrell started seeing patterns in life they had never noticed before. They learned that strength was not in dominating nature, but in cooperating with it. The forests that grew from Earth seeds survived storms not because humans built walls, but because each species protected the other. Birds warned of coming rains. Insects helped fertilize plants, and trees shielded the soil from harsh winds. The Tyrell realized that their own survival depended on working with life, not against it. By the 6th month, the Tyrell had begun to change in ways far deeper than physical survival. Their hearts, long hardened by centuries of struggle, began to soften. They laughed more, shared stories around fires, and sang songs inspired by humans and Earth's creatures. They built small villages where dogs slept near children and birds nested in the eaves of homes. The world they once feared was becoming a home filled with wonder. One day, a human worker stood with a group of Tyrell near a shallow stream. Small fish swam in the clear water while insects floated on the surface, pollinating tiny aquatic plants. The human bent down, scooping up a handful of water and letting it flow through his fingers. "This," he said softly, "is what life looks like when you let it lead." The Tyrell looked at him and realized he was right. They had always thought humans were fragile, unpredictable, even reckless. But humans had something the Tyrell lacked: faith in life itself. They trusted that the smallest acts, planting a seed, caring for a bee, or letting a dog run free, could change the world. And it did. The Tyrell began applying the lesson to their own lives. They built gardens without expecting immediate results. They protected small creatures, even the tiniest worms and insects. They let the rivers flow naturally and allowed animals to roam freely. Slowly, they stopped trying to dominate their environment and started learning from it. One night, as the two suns set in the Tyrell sky, the humans and Tyrell gathered together for a quiet moment. The ground was glowing faintly with bioluminescent plants that had grown from Earth's seeds. Dogs lay curled at their humans' feet. Birds sang from the trees and insects filled the air with gentle buzzing. The Tyrell elder, once skeptical of humans and their strange creatures, looked around in awe. "We thought intelligence was measured by power," he said, "by the machines we could build or the control we could impose. But we were wrong. Life itself is intelligence." A young human smiled and placed a hand gently on the elder's shoulder. "Intelligence without care is nothing," he said. "Life that cannot love itself cannot survive." The Tyrell had learned that lesson well. They now saw their world differently. Every river, every tree, every creature had a role. Every human and animal had a purpose. Their society began to thrive in ways they had never imagined. Homes were built with gardens. Schools taught children about animals, and cities were designed to let rivers flow freely. Life was no longer separate from them. It was them. One of the most remarkable changes was the Tyrell children. Growing up with humans and Earth's creatures, they were curious, brave, and compassionate. They learned to care for birds, feed small animals, and understand plants' needs. They understood teamwork because they had observed it in bees, crows, and humans. They didn't see life as a tool, they saw it as a teacher. Even the adults began to change. Leaders who once valued efficiency above all else now consulted with human scientists about how to balance growth with care. They started to teach empathy alongside logic. They began to rebuild not just buildings but the spirit of their civilization. The humans remained humble through all of this. They did not claim victory. They did not take control. They continued planting, observing, and teaching, reminding the Tyrell that it was not the humans who saved the planet. It was the collaboration between worlds, species, and generations. One evening, a storm approached. Heavy winds and rain threatened the newly restored forests. The Tyrell panicked, fearing destruction, but the humans calmly gathered everyone, including animals, into safe zones. Dogs barked warnings, birds flew to shelter others, and humans reassured the Tyrell with soft words and steady hands. When the storm passed, the Tyrell were astonished. Nothing was lost. The plants had bent but survived. The rivers remained and the creatures emerged unharmed. "That," said a human quietly, "is life teaching resilience. Storms will come. They always do. But life bends, it does not break." The Tyrell repeated the words for themselves. Life bends, it does not break. They would never forget them. From that moment, they began to see the world in a new way. They learned to respect unpredictability, to honor each creature's role, and to embrace cooperation over control. The lessons from humans and Earth's creatures became the foundation for a new Tyrell culture, one where empathy, patience, and understanding were as important as knowledge and skill. The Tyrell had called across the galaxy for help. They had expected knowledge, machines, maybe even power. Instead, Earth sent them life in all its messy, imperfect, and beautiful forms. And in return, the Tyrell learned a truth they had never known, that survival is not about force but about connection, not about domination but about care, not about certainty but about trust. And as the two worlds stood together under the alien sky, humans, animals, and Tyrell alike could finally understand something universal. Life is not only to be preserved, it is to be honored, nurtured, and loved. It was a lesson that would guide the Tyrell for generations to come. By the time the 6th year had passed since the humans arrived, the Tyrell world had been transformed completely. What had once been a silent, barren planet was now alive in every sense. Forests swayed in the gentle wind. Rivers sparkled under twin suns, and creatures from Earth roamed freely alongside the native life. Every day new growth surprised them. Flowers bloomed in colors Tyrell had never imagined. Birds nested in alien trees, and insects buzzed in perfect harmony, pollinating the plants that were now thriving everywhere. The humans no longer needed to lead every step. The Tyrell had learned the lessons well. They planted, nurtured, and observed with care. They built cities that blended seamlessly with nature. Homes were surrounded by gardens. Children learned about animals, plants, and ecosystems before learning history or mathematics. Their society had become a living classroom where every creature, plant, and human had a role. It was the first real dawn for a civilization that had almost vanished. The Tyrell leaders called a gathering. Not in the old central hall, now dust-filled, but in the largest green valley on the planet, where grass and flowers covered the ground, and the sound of running water filled the air. Humans, Tyrell, and animals alike came together. Dogs sat at their human sides. Birds flew overhead, cawing and singing. Even the tiniest insects hummed in the sunlight, invisible but vital. The Tyrell elder stood before the crowd. His body was thinner than it had been, but his eyes shone with pride and gratitude. "We once called across the galaxy, not knowing if anyone would answer," he said. "We expected aid, perhaps machines, perhaps warriors. What came instead was something far greater, life itself." The humans didn't speak. They let the words sink in. One human placed a hand gently on a small dog beside them. Another lifted a young bird onto their shoulder. Their presence was quiet but powerful. "Your world has taught us what we have always known," continued the elder. "Strength is not in control. Intelligence is not in domination. Power is not in machines. True power is in understanding and nurturing life." The younger Tyrell nodded, tears in their eyes. Children ran through the crowd, chasing birds and laughing with dogs. It was the first time in centuries that laughter carried through the valleys without fear or caution. Humans shared their final lessons, not as teachers, but as companions. "The world belongs to all who live in it," one said. "Every creature has a role, even the smallest. The world survives when we care, when we adapt, when we respect life. And now you have learned how to do this for yourselves." The Tyrell began to see a vision of their future, a civilization that didn't rely on domination or strict rules, but on cooperation with life itself. Every child born on this new world would grow up learning not just logic or science, but empathy and patience. They would understand that survival depended on respect for every living thing, from the smallest worm to the largest tree. That night, the valley glowed softly. Bioluminescent plants lit the paths. The stars reflected on calm rivers, and the gentle hum of insects filled the air. Humans and Tyrell sat together watching the scene. Dogs curled up near their owners. Birds nested in the trees. The Tyrell looked around and realized something astonishing. Life had returned not only to their planet but to their hearts. The humans spoke quietly. "This world is yours now. We only helped it remember how to live. The rest you will carry forward." The Tyrell understood. They had called for help and received life itself. And now it was their responsibility to nurture it. The humans would eventually leave, returning to Earth or traveling to other worlds. But the lessons they brought would remain forever. The next morning, humans prepared to depart. Ships were loaded with remaining animals and equipment, but nothing more. The planet was stable, thriving, and alive. Children ran alongside the humans, waving goodbye to dogs and birds alike. Even the adults felt a pang of sadness. They had grown attached to these beings who had arrived from so far away to change everything. Before leaving, a Tyrell elder spoke to the humans. "You have done more than we could have hoped. You brought not just life, but wisdom, and for that, we will never forget you." One human smiled and placed a small seed into the elder's hand. "Plant this. Let it remind you of what can happen when life answers a call. Let it remind you that Earth sent friends, not conquerors." With that, the human ships rose into the sky, engines humming softly, dogs barked, birds chirped, and for a moment the Tyrell watched silently as life they had never known returned to the stars. After the humans left, the Tyrell did not fall back into old habits. They continued to care for the planet, tending to forests, rivers, and creatures. Earth's animals adapted fully, becoming permanent residents. The Tyrell discovered that some species could even communicate in small ways with them. Dogs sensing danger, birds guiding travelers, and bees teaching them patience in ways words could not. Years passed, and the planet flourished beyond imagination. The once dying Tyrell world was now vibrant, full of energy and alive with music, laughter, and nature. Cities and nature coexisted seamlessly. Streams ran under bridges covered with flowers. Forests touched the edges of towns. Children learned to respect every creature, teaching their parents lessons in care and observation. The Tyrell began sending messages into space, not cries of desperation, but messages of hope. They told the universe that their world had survived, that life could thrive even in places thought lost. They spoke of humans who had brought more than technology. They had brought love for life itself. And somewhere, across the galaxy, the story traveled. It became an example, a lesson for other civilizations that true power is not conquest but compassion, that true intelligence is measured by respect, not domination, that life, when nurtured, can overcome even the darkest futures. The Tyrell themselves became teachers. Visitors from distant planets came to learn from them, and the Tyrell shared the lessons Earth's creatures had taught them. Forests, animals, and humans were no longer separate. They were one story, one ecosystem, one living testament to the power of life. At night, under a sky lit by stars and moons, the Tyrell children played among Earth's creatures, just as humans had once taught them. Dogs ran beside alien children, birds nested in unfamiliar trees, and insects hummed in patterns that seemed almost musical. Every laugh, every small act of care, reminded the Tyrell that the world was no longer theirs alone. It belonged to all who lived in it. The planet had been reborn. The Tyrell had been reborn, and in the end, the universe had witnessed something remarkable. When a civilization calls across the stars, it may not receive weapons or technology. Sometimes it receives something far greater, life itself in all its wild, messy, and beautiful forms. The humans had answered a cry across the galaxy. They had arrived not with power but with hope, and the Tyrell, now wiser and stronger than ever, would carry that hope forward, nurturing it for generations to come. A new dawn had truly arrived, not just for the Tyrell world, but for the galaxy itself. Life, unpredictable and unstoppable, had returned, and with it a promise. As long as there is connection, care, and courage, no world is beyond saving. The Tyrell looked up at the night sky, once dark and silent, now sparkling with stars. Somewhere among them, Earth shone faintly, and they knew that across the vast distance humanity had shown them something eternal. Life, when answered with love, can change everything.